highly recommend this book. If you're going to read any book on this list, I would make it this one. Hello everybody, my name is Carly. Today I will be doing a wrap-up of all the books I read in February, which I believe is 8 books. We started the month off strong with Duma by Stephen King, which I gave 5 stars. It's definitely in my top 10 King book list now. I will be doing another review video on this, but I did think it was a much slower paced King book, but I still really enjoyed it. I also appreciated getting to read a King book set in warm, sunny Florida because, as I'm sure you all know, King writes primarily about northeastern settings, particularly Maine. The main character, Edgar Fremantle, is a construction worker in Minnesota when one day an accident happens on the job and he is left without an arm and with memory problems, which cause him to lash out at those around him, ultimately leading to him getting divorced with his wife. His therapist recommends him to get a complete change in scenery and also pick up a hobby that he may have had in the past. Because of this, he decides to move down to Duma for a year, which is a fictional island off the Gulf Coast of Florida, and pick up the hobby of painting. He makes some friends with the people living on the island, and he starts to realize that his paintings may be causing bad things to happen in real life. The last quarter or so of this starts to get very supernatural, so keep that in mind if that is not your thing. Also, we got a frog on the cover, so that's a plus. Automatically getting up there in stars just for frogs. We continued on with another tome and another 5-star read, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. I don't even know where to start with this book, and I'm sure I'm going to do a separate video on this one too, because you kind of have to. I pretty much knew before going in that it was going to be a 5-star read. It's super long and time-consuming book. I would recommend getting multiple bookmarks if you're going to read this, because you are constantly flipping between pages and going to the back of the book and different footnotes. Essentially, it is notes on a book about a documentary about a house. So it's like story within a story within a story. My next book was the Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi, which I gave 4 stars. I thought it was a quick, enjoyable read. I think my main complaint is that it's marketed as an adult book, but it reads way too much like a young adult to me. All of the characters acted and spoke more like middle schoolers than the 25, 26, whatever, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds that they were. Every interaction was a joke. Nobody was ever serious. Even military personnel and government officials within the agency were always joking around. Also, don't read this book if pop culture references bother you, because there are many examples of it in this book. It probably references 20 or so different sci-fi books and movies and other various people and places. I started off really interested in the story, but it kind of just fell off for me, and I didn't really love the whole cliche of humans being the bad guys all along. It's about this person who ends up getting a new job taking care of these magical dinosaur-like creatures, and you follow the different scientists. Everyone's got their various fields that they're specialized in, so you got one chemist, one physicist, one biologist, one whatever. Every single field, pretty much. Things start to go wrong, lots of action happens, problems arise with the creatures. That's all I'm gonna say because I want to avoid spoilers. If that sounds at all interesting to you, I know I had a lot of criticism on it, but I still thought it was fun and ended up giving it 4 stars, so I would recommend it. I then went on to read Rage by Stephen King, which is his only book that he's pulled out of publication because he doesn't like the message behind it and how people are using it to justify their actions and taking his words in the wrong way. One day, the main character, Charlie, decides to take a classroom in his high school hostage with a G-U-N. I spell that out because I have a feeling YouTube doesn't like it when people say that word. The story takes place in one day following what happens in the classroom and the negotiations that the police are trying to make with Charlie to let these students go. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I personally gave it a 4-star. It feels wrong to say it because of the topic of the story, but I did enjoy reading it. It was also super short, and I flew through it and appreciated that it was a short read. And I kind of wanted to keep knowing what was going on in the story, so I didn't feel like it went too slow. I then went on to read Stephen King's Bill Hodges trilogy, all 3 of them in a row. So the first book is Mr. Mercedes, which I gave 5 stars and personally was my favorite in the series. Then the second book in the series is Finders Keepers, which I gave 4 stars and is my second favorite in the series. Lastly, it ends with End of Watch, which I also gave 4 stars, but I thought was significantly worse than the first 2. This one was not bad, but I did not really like the supernatural direction that it went in. I'm realizing now, after all of the King that I've been reading, that I tend to prefer his more realistic stories rather than supernatural ones. I'm not going to go over the plot of any of these because they're a trilogy and I don't want to spoil the series by talking about them. The last book I read of this month was possibly the best book that I read. It was A History of Fear by Luc Dumas. This was a newer release. It came out December 6th, 2022. If there's any book that you're going to read from this video, I highly recommend it being this one. I absolutely loved it. It is fictional, but it reads like a true crime because there are editor notes throughout it that seem real. When I was starting the book, I actually Googled whether or not this was based on a true story because it just was feeling a lot like it was. If you read House of Leaves, the main character in this story, Grayson Hale, reminds me a lot of Johnny Truant because both of them are slowly devolving as the story goes on, as they're reading someone else's notes and trying to understand them. The general plot of this is you're following Grayson Hale, who is an American, and this is not a spoiler, but at the beginning of the book it's explained that his dad has committed suicide and he wants to follow in his dad's footsteps after this happens. When his dad was his age, he went over to a school in Scotland to get a graduate degree. However, he ended up dropping out and moving back to the US, where he became a preacher and met Grayson's mom and settled down. Grayson decides to follow in his footsteps and apply to the same school, so this book follows him moving over to Scotland and his time there at the school. And he wants to follow in his dad's footsteps because he has daddy issues, which is one of the first things I wrote down. However, it's more like everyone issues. He always feels like he's letting everyone down, but particularly his dad. He really just wants his dad to feel proud of him. All throughout his childhood, he was neglected by his parents. They always showed his brother lots of love and just kind of ignored him and never acknowledged any of his accomplishments. Ever since he was a kid, he also has what he describes as satanophobia, which was the fear of the devil appearing and making him do things. And he was also raised and taught that religion is the solution to mental illness and that mental illness isn't real. You just need to pray more and ask God to help. When Grayson goes over to this school in Scotland, he meets this man named D.B. Daniel Blackburn and agrees to help him ghostwrite a story. However, over time, Grayson starts to believe that D.B. is the devil incarnate. And again, this is not a spoiler, it's from the beginning of the book. He ends up killing another student and claiming that the devil made him do it. This book kind of works backwards. It starts at the end and then goes all the way back to the beginning and explains how everything happened. It switches between a bunch of different time frames of Grayson's life. It goes between his childhood memories, his adult life in Scotland at the grad school, and then there's editor notes and interviews and psychologist notes from him being incarcerated after the murder. I would say read this book if you like unreliable narrators In the trial that occurred after the murder and in the editor notes and interviews, a lot of the testimonies disagree with the personal narrative of different events that happened in his life. They had very different viewpoints of how things went down. I also highly recommend the audiobook for this one. There's 5 or 6 different narrators, so it's very easy to differentiate between all the different time frames and editor notes and everything. There's both women and men, even someone doing a Scottish accent, which I really loved that narrator. This is more of a character-focused book, so it does go at a slower pace, so that might not be your type of read. Also, this might be off-putting to some people, because I know how people feel about the Colorado Kid, but the ending sort of reminded me like it. Not quite, you get a bit more answers than that, but it is more of an ambiguous ending. You're not going to get all of the answers. The various and conflicting viewpoints make you kind of question who you believe. This is another one of those ones that I kind of knew from the beginning that it was going to be a 5-star read for me. I guess the twist, if you can call it that, from very early on, but it didn't change my enjoyment of the story at all. I still really loved it. I also wanted to include this if you're a fan of Paul Tremblay. This is his blurb of the book. Disorienting, creepy, paranoia-inducing reimagining of the Devil Made Me Do It tale. Once again, highly recommend this book. If you're going to read any book on this list, I would make it this one. And that is all of the books that I read in the month of February. Let me know your thoughts on any of the books if you've read them down below in the comment section. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and consider subscribing so you get notified every Frog Friday when I post more videos. For today's Frog Fact, I'm going to be talking about the golden poison frog. This tiny little guy is only about the size of a paperclip, but it has enough toxins in it to kill 10 humans. Hope y'all have a great day. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.